8:30 in Winnipeg. You're listening to Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. It's the first Friday of the month, and that means it's time to welcome Chris Hall of McNally Robinson Booksellers back to the studio for the latest chapter in the longstanding What to Read feature. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Simon.
Great to see you. I was away last month when we had you in, and it was a big one to miss because it was I Love to Read month.
It was I Love to Read month, yes.
But I also know that it's always I Love to Read month at McNally Robinson. But just before we get to this month, how was the month at McNally and celebrating all things reading?
It was fun. We've kind of taken a bigger swing at celebrating every February. It feels like the right thing to do in Winnipeg, and everyone starts to get a little bit tired of the winter, so why not celebrate reading? So yeah, people have really responded, and it's fun to have some good news.
All right, well, let's keep the party going. Continue to celebrate reading in this month of March. You're going to start us off by sharing some details on how we can not only better manage, but also better appreciate our time, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a book called Saving Time, Discovering a Life Beyond the Clock, and it's by Jenny Odell, and that might be a familiar name to those who've listened for a long time, because I brought on a book called How to Do Nothing a few years ago now, and you probably know me well enough by now to know how much that title appeals to me, but in this new one, she encourages us to think about how much time we exchange and what do we exchange it for. We like to think we choose the details of that exchange, but some of us have the luxury of more choice than others, but also our time tends to get sucked into those little electronic devices, and is that a choice we're making? These are some of the questions. So she explores other ways to experience time. She explores how pre-industrial culture related to time. She looks into like ecological cues to time passing and geological time scales, which of course dwarf the way we think of time in hours. But she's ultimately hopeful. She believes that by paying attention to things like gardens growing and birds migrating and cliffs eroding, we can find our way to a life where the clock and all the profit motives, I guess, that entails, it doesn't have to rule quite so autocratically, I guess.
You know, it sounds like it really builds on her first book, How to Do Nothing, but almost assuming like you actually have the time to do nothing. So if you don't have that time, this will help you find it. So you should almost read the second first. Does that make sense?
So yeah, maybe so. Interestingly, it comes out of the pandemic too, of her sitting with a lot of time, so she started to think about it. So it's fascinating that way, because I don't think she's alone in that either. I think we all became a little bit more aware of time.
Yeah, aware and reevaluating. So very interesting title to start things off. Next, the latest from contemporary Canadian novelist Thomas Wharton, not to be confused with 18th century English literary historian and poet Thomas Wharton.
True. Thank you for the distinction.
Yeah, it's better to you make it clear.
Yes, his new novel is called The Book of Rain, and I think he must be one of the best unknown Canadian authors around. He's been published around the world. His first novel, Icefields, won a 1996 Commonwealth Writers' Prize. And it was also in the 2008 Canada Reads. His next book, Salamander, was shortlisted for the Governor General's in 2001, and 2006 Logogryph was shortlisted for the International Dublin Literary Prize. And I think I've said before, that's one of my favorites. I've discovered so many books from that shortlist and a long list. So this new one arrives with great expectations. It tells the story of a brother and sister who grow up in a northern mining town called River Meadows. And it's one of the 3 hot spots in the world producing ghost ore. And ghost ore is a new source of energy worth about 28 times its weight in gold. But it's also linked to slippages in time and space, which ultimately render the area uninhabitable. So it's a difficult novel to describe, but at its heart, I think it's about the world that we humans think we know, and but really don't know entirely. And it reminds me of a science book that I brought on 2 or 3 years ago by Elizabeth Colbert called Under a White Sky, which explored how the problems humans create when they try to turn the world to their own usage, and then you have to go clean up the mess, essentially. And it's a very thought-provoking novel. It doesn't preach, but it also doesn't explain. Boy, huge questions about life on this planet.
Yeah, very huge questions indeed. I was reading more about it, and its sort of build as a work of environmental literary suspense, which is what a fascinating genre. That just sounds like lots to dive into there. And definitely want to mention the fact that Thomas Warden, McNally Author of the Month, right?
Thank you. Yes, I was going to mention the same thing because I think he should be higher on our more of a household name, such that any Canadian author gets to be that. But yeah, he's a very worthy candidate for one of the better writers we have.
Very exciting indeed. Our next title looks at how we examine ourselves. A look at the humanities from Sarah Bakewell.
Yes, Humanly Possible is the title. 700 Years of Humanist Free-Thinking, Inquiry, and Hope. And yes, Sarah Bakewell wrote a book called How to Live about Michel de Montaigne and At the Existentialist Cafe. And sales of that book would indicate a healthy fascination of that philosophy amongst our neighbors. So she tells now she goes to the fascinating story of the long tradition of humanist thought, which is to say the ideas that put humans and human achievement at the center of its thinking, whether or not to the exclusion of religion. But some ways it's a series of biographies, everyone from Erasmus to Esperanto, from anatomists to agnostics, Voltaire to Zora Neale Hurston, and history of ideas. And it does not shy away from the fact that by human, that the definition has not always meant what we think of it now. Of course, some of these thinkers thought that meant white males who owned property. So, but the ideas still hold when you change the definition of human from our perspective to everyone. You can still get a lot out of the thinking. So it celebrates open-mindedness, optimism, freedom, power of the here and now, and of course, a book right up my alley. I love these histories of ideas.
Yeah, you certainly do, and I think a lot of us appreciate it. I mean, it's one of those things too that it's interesting just to note how fascinated thinkers have been, this sort of enduring impact on the humanities throughout the centuries. And so I guess the question I have, and I mean, sort of as you often pitch these books to us, my question back always seems to be, how does it read, though?
Oh, it reads so well.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah.
I was just on an airplane, and I was just happily reading it, and feeling a bit contrarian. Who else is reading a history of the humanities right now on this airplane? But no, it reads very well. She's a great writer, and so many of these authors make these histories so compelling. Yeah,
compelling and accessible too, right?
Yeah, very accessible.
So from a look at all of us to a look at one of us, tell us about the biography of X.
Biography of X, yes, another novel by Catherine Lacey. She wrote a novel called Pew, and that had a lot of Booksellers' interest. And so a lot of my recommendations come out of Booksellers' past interest. So here is an artist known as X, and she falls dead in her office, and her widow, in her grief, hurls herself into writing a biography of the woman she basically deified. Now, X was recognized as a creative force in her era, but she kept a very tight grip on her life story. So the book starts as a fictional biography that drops all the names of late 20th century New York scene, from Bowie to Waits, from Sontag to Acker. But when the widow realizes that X was originally born in the Southern Territory, it becomes clear that the story takes place in a very different USA, one where the nation split in 1946 into 3 territories, and where the South functioned as a fascist theocracy until its fall and reunification in the years just before X's death. So the book becomes a story where the lens of history is shifted, and one where it splits a country into geographic parts rather than just political parts. And the insights that it reveals were really quite striking. When I'm reading a realist novel and it takes a turn like this, I become really skeptical almost immediately. My guard comes right up. But the quality of writing and the storytelling here is so good. You just go along with it. It offers really interesting insights by turning to an alternative.
I'm no screenwriter or producer, but this just sounds like one of those that's going to become a TV show or a movie someday.
It could be, could be. Yeah.
Atwood-esque? One might say?
Maybe. I hadn't thought of that, but sure, maybe.
Oh, very fascinating. All right, so if you're just tuning in, I'm chatting with Chris Hall of McNally Robinson Booksellers with the What to Read feature. One last title and another eco-thriller. This genre is dominating the charts. Yeah.
I was joking the other day that I thought I chose these titles, but it feels like some sort of higher forces choosing these because, boy, themes develop. Despite my my intentions. But anyway, this is a new novel, Burnham Wood, and it's by Eleanor Catton. She is also, of course, the author of Luminaries, which won the Booker Prize and Governor General's Award in 2013. Not a very common combination for Canadian authors. She was born in Canada, but she lived most of her life in New Zealand, and this novel is set in New Zealand, where the Corraway Pass on the South Island is a landslide basically closes it and cuts off a town called Thorndyke and leaving a bunch of farmland abandoned. The disaster creates an opportunity for an organization called Burnham Wood, which is unregulated, sometimes criminal, sometimes philanthropic. It's a guerrilla gardening collective. And it plants crops wherever no one will notice. So their founder sees occupying the farm at Thorndyke as a means of not only legitimacy, but more importantly, solvency, and maybe some solid basin to move into the future. But this move pits them against an American billionaire who also has his eye on the property, and he makes them an offer. And they have to figure out what they're going to lose. What do they give up by accepting this offer? So it certainly has plays of Shakespearean drama, if the title isn't enough to tip you off.
Yeah.
It also has promises mixes of Jane Austen. I was not smart enough really to pick up those, but promises me that they are in there. And it explores, how our intentions lead to results that aren't always intended.
Well, lots to check out. And again, a very diverse list of, picks in the March edition of What to Read. Chris, as always, a pleasure having you here in studio. And a friendly reminder that in addition to finding the latest reading materials at McNally, listeners can also grab a bite at Prairie Inc. and learn a thing or two in the community classroom that is back.
Yes, it's back. Yeah, the offerings are growing steadily as each month passes. Yeah,
I noticed there's going to be an owl in the classroom this weekend. Very exciting. You never know what you're going to get.
That's an old favorite. There seems to be no end of people fascinated by owls. So
it sounds like it's going to be a real hoot. Yeah, there we go.
Very nice.
I don't get to use owl jokes all too often, so thank you for indulging me in that, Chris. And as always, lots to check out at McNallyRobinson.com. We'll have Chris's picks up at Classic107.com on the website later today. Great to see you as always.
Thank you, Simon.